So good day, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on enhancing accessibility in physical and digital spaces. My name is Stanislav Ostapenko, and I'm the Communications Director at Yevoda's Rare Diseases Europe, overseeing the Global Rare Disease Day campaign. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you today. For the benefit of our participants with visual impairments, each speaker will provide a brief description of themselves at the start of their respective presentations. So I'll go first. I'm a Caucasian male of Ukrainian origin in his early 30s. I'm 6'2" with short dark hair and brown eyes. Today I'm wearing a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and slippers as I'm connecting from home. Today we'll be exploring the challenges people with rare diseases face and ask questions like how can we make public spaces more inclusive and what steps can we make to ensure digital platforms are accessible for all. So now I would like to present to you our four esteemed speakers, experts in the area of accessibility. Meet Adéla Odrihocká, who is an award-winning advocate for rare diseases. She co-chairs the patient organizations for people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in the Czech Republic and serves on the board of Rare Disease Czech Republic. Adéla is a frequent speaker at European rare disease conferences and focuses on areas such as gender bias in healthcare, workplace inclusion, accessibility, and the social impacts of rare diseases. She also works as a consultant specialist for the Ministry of Health of the Czech Republic, contributing to projects for comprehensive health and social care for people with rare diseases. Our next speaker is Andre Felix, who is a communication manager at the European Disability Forum. Since joining in 2018, Andre has coordinated communications in media relations. With a background in European Union-related communications, he previously worked with the European Association of Service Providers for People with Disabilities and the European Commission. He holds a Master's of Arts in European Business Studies, specializing in marketing. Our next speaker, James Buller, is an accessibility consultant and civil servant in the United Kingdom. For the past 8 years, James has advised on the development of online public services, ensuring they're accessible to people with disabilities. Previously, James worked for 10 years in the digital media team of a funding organization communicating about grants for non-profit projects. He transitioned into user experience roles from a coding background and has continually volunteered in charities at both frontline and trustee levels. He leads the Aniridia Network, a support group for people with a rare genetic visual impairment aniridia, and actively contributes and promotes a Rare Disease Day through the network's communication channels. Last but not least, I'm pleased to introduce our own communications junior manager, Liz Perna, who is in charge of the Rare Disease Global Campaign. Liz joined Yevoda in November 2021, and prior to it, Liz had worked for the nonprofit association as in live to oversee its digital strategy, but also manage its partnerships with patient organizations and schools. Liz holds a master's degree in marketing management, as well as an international business administration bachelor from the Rotterdam School of Management. A native French speaker, she also speaks English and is learning Mandarin. If you have any questions, we will address them all during the Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to leave your questions in the chat or in the dedicated Q&A section on your screen. If you have a question for a specific speaker, kindly mention their name. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Andre Felix. Andre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. As Stan mentioned, I'm Andre Felix. I've been working in the disability rights sector for 8 years now. And as part of my tasks, I do manage accessibility and I do implement accessibility for persons with disabilities in our communications. I am a 33-year-old man with black hair and a black beard and brown eyes. I am white, but with a fading tan from summer, and I'm currently wearing a blue shirt with some white and yellow motifs. That said, first I would like to thank Eurordis for inviting me to speak. And indeed, next slide, thank you. And for my speaking slot, let's say, with my colleagues will very expertly speak on other topics, but I would like to present a bit the introduction to accessibility, why and how accessibility is important, and our accessibility checklists. What we've noticed in the European Disability Forum, as we serve a population of persons with disabilities of over 100 million people with diverse types of disabilities, is that while our member organizations, such as Rare Diseases Europe and many others, are very good at accessibility, sometimes it misses a bit the expansion for the needs of other user groups. That means that sometimes we think a lot about how to make events accessible for our members, for the people we know, but we do forget that, especially in communication, it's also important to look at other user groups and the diverse audience and the diverse needs of persons with disabilities. So I'll present our EDF accessibility checklist that tries to bring everything together. I will talk a bit about the low-hanging fruits, as I like to say, how to make images accessible, social media accessible, and a bit on videos, and I will share some useful resources. So why accessibility? A easy way to talk and to explain what is accessibility for a person with disabilities is to look at what it does. It's about ensuring that persons with disabilities, all persons with disabilities with all types of needs, can access on an equal basis with others to the physical environment, transportation, and I think what we are talking also a lot here today, information and communication. It is about distributing information and making our events adapted to make sure that everybody can actually attend them and that everybody can get their information. Sometimes that means adapting our events and creating new forms of communication. Sometimes it also means making sure that we have the same type of information available in different formats. So for example, I think James will explain it better, but not only to have a PDF to our information, but also to have it directly in the website and let people choose what they want to access. Next slide, please. But why? Sorry, one slide. Something else about accessibility is that in organizations like ours, it is crucial. It is crucial for persons with disabilities to be able to even access the information and have the information. But many types of adjustments we make to make things accessible are beneficial to all. For example, closed captions that now are becoming more common are useful for persons with disabilities, but many people, such as journalists or even I, when I need to write an article about a meeting that I go, I rely on closed captions to make sure I don't forget anything and I keep all the information. However, still most campaigns and most people in general, unfortunately, do not consider it that is needed, but also beneficial for others. And they look at it as something that does not have much value. However, if we don't have access to information, if persons with disabilities or persons with accessibility needs cannot access the information, they cannot also participate. They cannot engage with your content. And finally, something that is important to remember is also accessibility is, I like to say a bit a cliche, but it is a journey. That means that different users do have different accessibility requirements. So we should not keep ourselves to the users that we know, to the people that we know. But also it's difficult if it's not 0 or 100. It is often, in my experience, easier to go step by step to try to implement things in a phased way so that you are not overwhelmed. Often you might indeed learn, and it would be great for us if everybody could make everything accessible immediately, but doing something is better than doing nothing. Next slide, please. And something that I really like about accessibility personally, and I think it's sometimes forgotten when we talk about this, is the importance of alternative formats, of making sure that your information is not only available in a PDF or in a video, but that there are different ways that you can access. This is important because even if you make everything very accessible, there will still be people with specific user needs that will prefer at the moment to access the information in their specific way. So normally what we do, for example, is maybe we have a PDF, but we have also the information directly on our website, or when we have a video, we try to put a transcript or a short description of the video. People are diverse, and making sure that you have alternatives that people not only are able to access, but they like to access, leads to reaching more people. Something else that I think it's important to understand is some examples of how people with accessibility needs access information. So I have here some examples, which I will describe. In the photo that I have here, we see a blind Asian woman with very big white headphones on that are connected by a cable to a computer that we cannot see. The woman is using what we call a screen reader software. This is a kind of software that when you are on your computer, it reads you all the information that is in your screen in a certain order. It's quite widely used by persons with visual disabilities, but also by persons with other types of disabilities, such as dyslexia, processing information difficulties. So for these types of screen readers, it is important that you use all, not make the information visually only visually nice and visually understandable, but also that you use the tools that in your website or in Word to make headings, links, and other types of this technical information according to what the software gives you. Next slide, please. I believe James will explain this better than me. Here we see a woman in the background, slightly blurred, and in front of her, someone is holding a hearing aid. This is another type of assistive devices that helps person with hearing loss or hearing impairments to understand better what people are saying or speaking. Persons with hearing aids will probably often in physical events need what is called the hearing loop, which I think Adéla will also explain. But they also benefit, for example, of having closed captions that we speak slower also, which sometimes it's difficult for me, and that they have sometimes also sign language provision. And here we see a young man with Down syndrome doing sports. And it's also important to remember that it's not only about making our information accessible to interact with this kind of devices or this kind of accessibility technology, but also making sure that our information is easy to understand. Persons with Down syndrome or intellectual disabilities often benefit of learning through or reading or listening to people giving information in plain language or in a system that we call easy to read. This is something that is more developed than in our accessibility checklists. And I would invite you then to check, as it is quite interesting, but quite long to explain. So I think with this, we understand that people have different accessibility needs, and that is important that we have different systems and that we apply different techniques at all times to make sure that our information is accessible. To facilitate in this journey and to facilitate in this process, I will not only give you some easy tips and tricks, which for me are easier to implement and can start your journey or continue your journey, but EDF also prepared something called our accessibility checklists. They are available in your website. In the PowerPoint that we are sharing now, there is a link to this checklist, and I believe then I can share it also on the chat. These are self-assessment tools, which basically show you everything that you can be doing to make your information more accessible, and where you can tick the boxes, let's say, to see more or less where is your level. These checklist, besides having, of course, a more start of the journey process, knowing where you are and where you have to go. They also have sections to learn with simple and easy tools, information, and signposting, as we call it, links to places that can explain you more. The checklists are not perfect, so of course we are always welcoming feedback, but they try indeed to keep it as simple as possible and to make sure that you can at least start doing some things to make your journey, to understand how accessible is your information, your communication, your events, and how you can do more. Now, as an introduction, just to give you a taste of accessibility as well, I'm talking a bit about how to make your social media more accessible and also your images more accessible. Social media platforms are both a curse and a blessing. As a lot of things that you put in social media are constrained by the type of platform you use, you can just do so many things on Facebook or on Instagram or on Threads. They are not fully accessible. There are some things that you can do and that you should do, but you also don't have full control into making it completely accessible. That said, things that you can do are quite easy. First, in social media, especially the ones with shorter character limits, use simple words. Don't make your message too complicated. Then there was a trend more on Twitter, X, and Threads to use Unicode characters, these fancy text with italics and bold. Do not use them on social media because screen readers will read them as a mathematical sign and not as what the word looks like. If you use hashtags that are more than one word, it's important to capitalize the first letter. This is so people with information processing issues and visual impairments can understand that the hashtag is more than one word. So it's quite easy. As I have it here, you can put an hashtag, accessibility is good, and you capitalize the A, the I, and the G, so that you can also visually see that is different words. Limit hashtags and emojis. It's recommended that you have 1 or 2 hashtags and 1 or 2 emojis, and if when possible, to keep them at the end. This does not mean that you don't need to use them, but it does mean that you need to make sure that they doesn't impair the way that you understand the message. And finally, you can add alternative text to your images, which I will explain in the following slide. So alternative text, which some people also called image description, even though it's not the same, it's a written description of the content of the image. It's more an art than a complete science how to write it, but the important part is to make sure that when you use visual information, images, infographics, memes, these type of things, the important content is also written. So if you're using an image to pass a point, for example, a destroyed building, if I want to be very dark, it's important to share that you're sharing this destroyed building to show the implications of something. You don't need to be, and I think many accessibility experts also recommend that you don't go too long, that you don't describe every little thing, but that when you read it back to you, you can get what is the point of having that image. If the image is just decorative and we are using, for example, you are in your website or in Word, PowerPoint, you can also mark the image as decorative. If it's not bringing many information and it's just to look nice, then it's not necessary to burden a bit persons using screen readers to spend more time listening to what the image is saying. So it's I have some resources on this at the end. It should not be too long, so you should not be spending too much time on it, and should convey the intention and the important information behind the image. Of course, if you have words in an image, you also need to share them. Something else that is important with images is also to ensure good color contrast, especially when you have written information or you are doing illustrations. There is a very nice, very free and very good color contrast checker where you can use online. You can see if the colors that you're using pass the test. But just in a technical information, the color contrast at the moment, we recommend 4.5 to 1, or the Web Accessibility Guidelines recommend this. An example of a very short alt text, I show here a picture of a blind man with sunglasses holding his smartphone while listening intently to it. So as you can see, there is a bit of extra information that you might not have in the image, but it is clearly someone listening to a screen reader. So it's important to add it in the alt text. But different experts do have different opinions on this. Next slide, please. For videos, I have 4 easy things that are important. First of all, adding captioning and sign language. Adding captioning especially, it's quite important, not only for persons with disabilities, but of course you should do it for persons with disabilities. But also a lot of people don't watch videos now with their sound down because they are in the bus, they are in the office, they don't want to. So captioning is an example of an accessibility requirement that is also helpful for more people. If you put text in your video, I think James will also share this, it should be a sans serif font. So this is a font without all the nice rococo, as we would say, the nice add-ons sometimes to words. They are more clean fonts like Arial and Verdana, and it should be at least 24 points of font size. If you have music, background music, you should have a difference of at least, I think there is a big mistake here. In checklist is more correct. I think it's around 20 decibels. I will correct in the chat. And very important, try to avoid flashing content. Try to avoid these effects that can trigger epileptic seizures or other types of effects. Next slide, please. And I think I reached the end, more or less on time. You can see some resources then when we send the PowerPoints or checklists of everything that is needed. There is a very good website called Accessible Social where you can learn how to make your social media accessible. And I personally, for all communications staff or people working in marketing out there, I recommend the color contrast analyzer. It's an example of something that is about accessibility, but also lets you find colors used in websites and match a bit things. So it's quite useful. If you want to go deeper into this, well, my colleagues will also go to this, but the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are a bit the existing standards with all the accessibility information. And I stop talking now. Thank you so much. And I pass the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you, Andre, for sharing your insights on accessibility. I think it was beneficial for everyone also to learn how this best practices are not only beneficial to people with disabilities, but also other partners, including media. So now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to James. James, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me along today. I am James Buller, and I am a white male. I'm 45 years old, and I've got brown hair and a beard, and I have the rare genetic visual impairment aniridia, which means that I lack the coloured parts, the irises in my eye, and I lead the aniridia network in the UK. So I'm going to talk a few things today about web pages, about documents, whether they're online or to some extent printed as well. And you can also apply the things that I'm going to talk about today and that Andre was talking about as well to things like emails and generally anything that you write and produce. We're going to go through in 3 main sections: what the content looks like, what the content says, and how it's structured. So first of all, what does the content look like? How should you make it look to make it accessible? So first of all, left-aligned text is liable to be missed by readers, especially those using magnification, where they're only scanning down the left-hand side of the page. To demonstrate this problem, the text that I've just written Some of you might have missed the fact that at the right-hand side there was some additional text, so that's like an example of making and not making it accessible. That's the pattern with a lot of these slides. They are deliberately non-accessible, some of them, to demonstrate the point. So the next point is, don't use right justified text. Justified text is hard to read for everyone, especially people with dyslexia. This is because the wide gaps between words called so-called rivers of white down the page. There's also no jagged right-hand edge to guide the eye. And to demonstrate the problem, the paragraph I just read is styled with justified text, and it looks awful and is hard to read. Keep text simple. Italics are hard to read, especially in light fonts. All capitals hides the shape of words, making them hard to read, and is also termed as shouting online. Underlined hides the bottom of letters, G, I, P, and Q and Y, for example. When you put them links, it makes them hard to see the tails of the letters. Bold text is okay, but it can be hard to read, particularly if there's a lot of it. It also then starts to lose its impact the more you use it. So these points are especially true for people with visual impairments or dyslexia. Now, again, some of those paragraphs that I just read there are shown in italics, all caps, and with underlines and bold. And I think we can all agree that they are harder to read than the last sentence that's just in plain text there. Another point to note is that for screen readers, those devices that people with visual impairments might use to read out the screen rather than seeing the text on it, screen readers typically won't read out these kind of stylings. So bear in mind that they will be lost on people who can't actually see them. Use colours that contrast well. To get your message across effectively, it needs to be easy to read. You can check this with some of the tools that Andre mentioned, or another one I can recommend is purely online is whocanuse.com. This helps people with visual impairments. On this slide, there are two lines that don't contrast well with the purple background. The dark grey text is an extreme case of poor contrast. The light grey text is also just slightly too dark to meet the contrast requirements. Let's think about now what the content actually says. Avoid or explain acronyms and jargon. All acronyms must be explained when first used. Alternatively, just always explain the acronym and don't use the acronym at all. Explain, rephrase, or remove jargon where possible. This is a requirement of the W3C, WAI, WCAG, AAA. That last line there demonstrates why this is important. Those acronyms are not explained to you, and it won't make sense to many people, perhaps including you. For information, that meant the World Wide Web Consortium and the Web Accessibility Initiative, who created the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines at the AAA level. Use descriptive link text. The text of every link should describe where it goes to, without having to read any text around it. Especially avoid read more by itself or here as link text. Avoid links that are wordy as well, or just purely URLs. This point helps screen reader users who can list the page's links just by themselves out of context and then hear them read out. And on screen now is a screenshot of the JAWS screen reader doing just that. So in what I just read, both read more and here appear to be links, but there's no indication of where they go to for the user if we actually clicked on them. So use link text that actually says where they go. If you have a graph of any kind, the values from that data also need to be provided in plain text format as well. Now, usually you do that with a data table. Also with graphs, make sure that the lines are significantly different from each other so that people who have colour vision deficiency or colour blindness can tell them apart. So a good way to do that is to use dashes for one and solid lines for another and stars or something for a third line. It can be particularly difficult when, as here, the lines cross over each other and it can be difficult to tell which one goes up and which one goes down. Think about not just with the interface, but the wider service that you're providing. Provide both oral and text-based contact methods, such as phone or in person, and email and web chat. This is for people who struggle with just having one method. For example, a deaf person may well struggle to use a phone, while a person with dyslexia might strongly prefer a phone call compared to writing and reading emails. If you only provide one contact method, you're likely to block out or deter some people from contacting you, so provide options. Consider if there is enough information to be inclusive in what you've produced. For example, what accessibility features does the event have or not have? Have you mentioned that? Is the report that you've produced available in alternative formats? Have you told people that it is? Can such formats be published too? Can you provide them directly on your website rather than people having to come to you and ask for them? And how can any other formats that you might be able to produce also be requested? Lastly, let's look at how the content is actually structured. Follow these guidelines. Use short, concise paragraphs. Here we have 120 words of pretend text shown as both one big, solid paragraph and as 3 small paragraphs. I think we can agree that the second option looks much more inviting to read and so is much more likely to communicate your message effectively. Use lists. Lists give, with bullet points, give structure to text, making it easier to read. So use bullets for unordered lists and numbers for sequences. Use headings. In Word, you can apply heading 1 style to documents, but don't use the title style. There should be only one heading 1 for any one document or web page, and then major sections should use a heading 2 style. If there are subsections, use heading 3 and then heading 4 and so on. So use higher headings levels to indicate more important sections. And if you can, avoid skipping sections, but it's not absolutely essential. Don't use headings just to make a big, bold text. Text style with big and bold is not a heading, particularly in case of screen reader users trying to navigate your document. Website content management systems are generally the same as this, but there can be some differences. If you're using PowerPoint, then except for the very important slides title, be aware that there are no headings to structure your content in PowerPoint. And in Excel, it's deceptive. There are heading styles, but again, they are not in reality heading styles, again, for the purposes of assistive technology, such as screen readers. So you can use them, but don't rely on them. So all this is, as I say, particularly important for screen reader users who can jump to a particular section rather than having to listen to all of your document continuously. They can just jump to the particular bit that they want. So this is another example of why headings are important. Here we've got a little sample document. And if we were listening to this with a screen reader when we just brought up the headings by itself without the rest of the content, then this is what we might hear. H2, I thought it was brilliant. So that doesn't really give us any helpful. So there's no heading 1. Heading 2 seems to have been used to be making a quote prominent, as it's unlikely to be a section heading. And the heading 3 level is completely missing, and the heading 4s don't make any sense due to a lack of context. It just says by car and by train. So let's see what it perhaps could have said instead. So now we've got on the right a good heading structure for the same page. Now we can tell that the page is about a staff away day, and it contains the agenda and details about the venue, and then within the venue it says how to get there, and then the details of by car and getting to the venue by train. It's a lot clearer now what the structure of this document is, both visually and for a screen reader user as well. Provide a table of contents for a similar reason. This is really useful for lots of people to be able to get to the part of the document that they really want to. Don't use tables for layout purposes. It can be really tempting to try and put things into columns using a table. Don't do that. It's bad for accessibility. Only use tables for actual table data. Just to finish off then, some other considerations to make things more accessible. As Andre alluded to, do try to use web pages rather than documents if at all possible. Broadly speaking, web pages are more accessible than documents, particularly as I say, if you're going to use things like PowerPoint and stuff like that. So yeah, do prefer to put your content just directly on a web page rather than putting it in a download. Do prefer a file though if the content really needs to be downloadable and editable by the user, or available to the user offline, or perhaps is like highly designed, so maybe it's an InDesign document or something like that, or it's intended to be read as one kind of complete package, which might be not desirable to do on a web page. If in doubt, publish both. You can, in Microsoft applications, there is a very handy accessibility checker, which you can get to in a few different ways, check your particular version, but you can basically get Word, PowerPoint and Excel to alert you to the accessibility problems within your document. Be aware it won't find all of the issues, but it's a really good starting point and is a really good way of learning about accessibility too. Few things you can do to, as well as following these guidelines, is to actually really start to understand what these the issues are, is learn to test with a screen reader. If you've got a Windows device, you've got Narrator built into it. If you've got a Mac, you've got VoiceOver. Learn how to use them, just find out how it works, just to get a sense of the kind of issues that people face when using those devices. More generally, consider what barriers a person with each type of disability would face with your content and remove them. Look at your content and think, how would someone with dyslexia, sight impairment, autism, and so on, think about it from their point of view and make adjustments accordingly. I've provided some references here, if we provide slides afterwards. WebAIM is a really good place to go and get an accessibility checker for your web pages. AbilityNet has some great guidance and provides consultancy. And DQ has lots of other guidance and tools, and also lots of free courses. In particular, if you have a disability, their accessibility course is freely available. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to the next person.
Thank you, James. I appreciate you sharing the tips and making the content available and things like clear formatting, but also sharing resources to consult for people willing to learn more. So now we will move on to Adéla, and Adéla, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stan. Hello, everyone. Thank you to Yordis for organizing this webinar. My name is Adéla. I'm a white woman, 30 years old. I have medium-length brown hair, brown eyes, and I wear red glasses. And today I'm wearing a blue and white striped button-up shirt that is visible on the camera. And I have a white plain background behind me. And I'm also a person living with a rare disease and a disability myself. Okay, so I'll give you some basic but very important information on what to think about when organizing an in-person event. And as my colleague Andre said in the beginning, it's a journey. And so take it step by step and especially plan in advance when planning an event. Okay, next slide, please. So if you are planning an in-person event, the work starts way before the event itself. It starts by thinking about accessibility features you need so everyone feels welcomed and have their needs met. You also need to make sure that the process to request accommodations for the event for participants is clear, smooth, and not stressful. And last but not least, very important, the way you advertise your event will influence that if people will decide to participate or not. So make sure that your invitation is accessible and that you mention that accessibility features will be present. And so you let you know that you ensure a smooth participation for all. And because if that's not written in the invitation, it can put an additional stress to participants with disabilities who then won't be sure if they're even able to fully participate. Next slide, please. So if you are planning an in-person event, it begins with considering, the accessibility features. And when we think of accessibility, we very often think, or the first thing that pops up in our mind is the physical architectural accessibility, which is ramps, lifts for individuals using wheelchairs or with mobility issues, which is true and very important, but it only starts with this. So when we think about physical accessibility, make sure that your venue is physically accessible, which means that it includes ramps, elevators, and accessible routes. And don't hesitate also to check the compliance with your local regulations, as this may vary from country to country. It's also great to designate a parking spots, accessible parking spots near the entrance. Restrooms as well, accessible, clearly signed. And what is very useful on the European level is what we call the Euro key, or the British version of Rare key, that we find very often in public institutions that allow users to open facilities without asking for the key. You can have the key yourself and open the door. So next slide, please. So you need to make sure as well that the seating is accessible. So you can plan seating for individuals using wheelchairs, walkers, different mobility aids, and for their companions. Make sure that there is space to move freely, to turn around, that it's not, very tight. And there's also one point that is very important and very often forgotten when organizing inclusive, accessible venues and events. And what we see very often, even in venues that claim to be fully accessible and inclusive, is that during catering, it includes, those high tables. So ensure that seating options are available, and you can provide high chairs that go with the high tables for individuals who cannot stand for extended periods of times, but also provide standard seating lower nearby for people using wheelchairs, walkers, or wheelchairs without the lift. Nowadays, technology is great, so some wheelchairs have the lift included, so people can actually go to the high of a bar table, but not everyone. So provide also standard seating that is lower. An extra tip for you is to encourage movement, and even in the invitation, if that's possible. So you can let attendees know that they can move freely during sessions, which reduces the need to sit in one place for extended periods, which can be very difficult for some people. It can help with physical discomfort or sensory sensitivities. Regarding the visual accessibility, it's crucial to ensure that all signage uses high contrast, as James already mentioned, and includes Braille to assist those with visual impairments. We should also offer human assistance or orientation to help individuals navigate the space effectively. And materials should be also available in large print, Braille, screen reader compatible formats. And when presenting, you can use high contrast slides and provide verbal descriptions of images or visual elements to ensure everyone can follow along. Also, what is great with technology is tactile maps. You can use tactile maps of the area that are great to implement. And nowadays, with the existence of 3D printers, it's very easy to make actually. So not only the venue area, but also it's great to have at the entrance of the accessible bathroom, for example, for better orientation. So people with visual impairments, when they are using bathroom, they know at which side there is a sink, if there are towels, etc. So for audio accessibility, providing sign language interpreters is important for those who are living with hearing impairment. Also, you can provide real-time captions for presentations and videos, so you can ensure that everyone can access the spoken content. For those using hearing aids, this was mentioned here as well, induction loops are used very often, also known as hearing loops. These are assistive listening systems that are used at events for people who use hearing aids or cochlear implants, so they can better hear and understand the sound in noisy environments. So they work by transmitting audio experience by improving the clarity and the reducing the background noise. Okay, next slide, please. For those living with cognitive and learning disabilities, it's essential to use plain language and avoid complex instructions. This was said here as well. If you can avoid using complex, difficult language, it's always better for everyone. You can also provide documents that are what we call easy to read and that are well structured. You can incorporate visual supports like icons, pictograms, and images. What is great also is creating quiet spaces for sensory breaks, which can also help individuals who may become overwhelmed by stimulation. But from our experience, those quiet spaces benefit very often everyone, as participating in these kind of huge venues and conferences might be quite overwhelming for everyone. And we all need a break. Next slide, please. So sensory accessibility, you can establish low stimulation zones with low lighting and minimal noise to accommodate those with sensitive or sensory input. You can avoid loud sounds and flashing lights. This is very important. This might be harmful for individuals living with epilepsy, or you always need to make sure that you provide a flashing light alert beforehand. So those who are concerned can either leave the room or plan accordingly. You can also avoid crowded areas to prevent discomfort and offer flexible seating options. As I said, the same extra tip that I mentioned for the physical accessibility, it can benefit many people. And maybe some people can choose, less crowded spaces if needed. Next slide, please. Also, we shouldn't forget about the catering, as I mentioned, dietary needs and allergies. You should provide food options that have various dietary restrictions, such as gluten-free, vegan, nut-free options. And make sure that you clearly label food ingredients to help people make informed decisions and avoid potential danger. Next slide, please. And last but not least, technology and tools that we've heard from our other two colleagues. Ensure that technology and tools that you are using are accessible. If you are creating an application that is specific to your conference or your venue, your event, provide app that is easy to read with screen readers, voice commands that accommodate diverse needs. Consider also offering hybrid events that combine online and in-person formats to maximize the accessibility, and you can also reach a broader audience with this for people who cannot travel for various reasons or need or want to participate online from home. So that should be it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Adéla. Thank you. There is quite a lot to learn from, and there are indeed many various practices and best practices that can be implemented both online, but also, both offline and online. So just before we move on to Q&A, we will also hear from Lise, who will share a few things of how we've also tried to pioneer, as you said, accessibility is a journey, but the steps that we've taken as the global coordinator.
Thank you, Stan. So hi, everyone. I'm Liz. I'm a 27 Caucasian woman. I'm French. I have long, I would say, brown curly hair, and I'm currently not sporting the Rare Disease Day colors. Unfortunately, I'm wearing a gray shirt with little black stars, but I am sporting the Rare Disease Day colors with my virtual background today. That is the updated one for 2025 that I will introduce a little bit later during my presentation. Ahead, as Stan mentioned, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, and also an opportunity for you to ask questions to all the experts that shared their insights today. So, what was our approach for Rare Disease Day? Well, we took all the inputs from the various fronts that were previously mentioned, and our objective is to gradually grow the global campaign and to make it more accessible. So we will first focus on following general recommendations and then assessing our website, adjusting our new social media post, and updating our 2025 digital resources. So in terms of following general recommendations, if you have followed all the talks that we had today, there are various important points that need to be taken into account. So for written content, for example, we made some changes to make sure that we had greater accessibility in terms of font size, but also in terms of linked text. So making it descriptive, such as you can see Wednesday, 18 September for the webinar, and avoiding words like click here. Avoiding acronyms as well, and using headings and lists. So we do that in our newsletters, but of course in our documents as well. And we are aiming to gradually update all of our Rare Disease Day documents so that they can be more accessible. Then in terms of color contrast, we assessed our Rare Disease Day multiple colors, namely pink, blue, green, purple, and checked all of them for the different combinations that can meet the contrast criteria. So you will see my presentation today is in dark navy blue, as it is the color background that works best with most of our Rare Disease Day colors. So dark background with lighter text. Then another approach, another action that we took is to assess our Rare Disease Day website. We had a review conducted between July and August, with a final report listing different recommendations, such as elements regarding font size, design inconsistencies, and the various actions that need to be taken to meet the criteria of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So we have listed all those changes, and throughout the campaign, they will be gradually implemented in order to improve the website on different fronts. In terms of adjusting our new social media post, we will make sure that the post that will be posted for the 2025 campaign will follow the recommendations that were previously listed. So using simple words, avoiding acronyms, or if we are using acronym, explaining them ahead of time, capitalizing our hashtags, adding alternative text and image descriptions, and using descriptive call to actions, as well as other elements that were previously mentioned. So this will be implemented, of course, from the first post for Rare Disease Day 2025. As I hope all of you know, the campaign will officially launch on the 20th of November 2025, but of course we will also try to implement those changes as early as of now. Then the final actions that we took was when we updated our digital resources for Rare Disease Day 2025. So for those of you that joined us previously on our all people meeting in July, you were introduced to the fact that our templates were developed with the help of our creative agency, Hello Tomorrow, and we really tried to focus with them on accessibility. So they used tools such as Dark Layer to ensure a greater readability. All those resources as well were created with the purpose of being adaptable to fit your needs. So of course you can feature yourself in our poster, for example. You can also, as always, translate the resources and adapt the text so that it can fit your purpose. Now, I included in this slide 2 of our new elements for Rare Disease Day 2025 that will be available this month soon on our website. So if I provide you with a brief description, on the top right of my slide, we have the English support pledge card. So the background is painted with blue, green, and pink with paint strokes that is very Rare Disease Day brand. We have the date 28th of February 2025 with the text I support Rare Disease Day. And you also have the link to the website, learn more on rarediseaseday.org, as well as our hashtag, capitalized Rare Disease Day, so capital R, capital D, and capital second D. Then our poster on the left of one of our poster, actually, because we have multiple ones. I didn't include all of them because I want you to have a bit of surprise when we're going to put the resources on the website. Is also featuring our hashtag, so hashtag Rare Disease Day, as well as the date and our overall slogan, I would say, more than you can imagine, with a description of Tammy and Ava for our Australian champions for the Rare Disease Day 2025 campaign. There are 3 other champions that you will meet as well when our resources are added to the website. So the poster also features the QR code to the website as well as the Rare Disease Day logo. Tammy and Ava are 2 Caucasian, so child and mother, with Rare Disease Day colored paints, and they're facing each other on the poster. So I think that's about all I have to tell you for the Rare Disease Day campaign. Again, as it was stressed, I think, by all of our speakers, this is a gradual process, and we're trying as much as possible to further improve all of our different media. So please, if you have any also additional feedback or additional points that you would like us to take into account, don't hesitate to reach out to us at the email rarediseaseday@eurodis.org. And without further ado, I'll give the floor to Q&A. So feel free to drop your question in the Q&A section. Drop them in the chat otherwise. And I also maybe in the chat will ask Miriam if it was a question that you had or if you would like us to give you the floor. Also maybe to, because I answered that question in the Q&A section, but I will say it as well. This webinar was recorded and is currently still being recorded, and it will be sent to you so that you can watch it again, or if you missed part of it, that you can rewatch the sections that you missed. And I'm seeing another questions. The slides will also be shared in the same email. We will make sure to include also all the relevant links that all of our speakers shared with you. So a lot of important resources that we definitely invite you to check out. So there is a question from Lauriane. I think all of our speakers actually can probably have some insights in that question. She's saying, I'm convinced of the importance of accessibility, but not everybody is, especially when no budget was planned for it. How do you make a case for it? Hard questions. I don't know who wants to go first.
Maybe I will give my opinion first, and then my panelists could share. It is indeed an excellent question, and I don't really have the ultimate answer. We've been at the European Disability Forum. Of course, we focus more on the fact that it is often a legal requirement, or it's often a human rights issue that even if one person is excluded, then you're doing wrong. But of course, in reality, these more human rights approach also often does not sway everyone. Some things that I suggest and that I've also used, of course, is to look at, depending on who you're speaking, to look at how many persons with disabilities, or even with even if they don't identify as disabled, that have accessibility needs that they serve. There's quite a lot of information online about how much the disabled and neurodiverse communities worth. It's not my favorite, honestly. It's not my favorite approach, as it is quite making us about money. Otherwise, what I also suggest and has been quite helpful is for people to start doing a bit of the no budget adaptations, the adaptations that you don't require budgets, and see how it works. Normally, what we really discover, what we get back is indeed not only it helps because not only the communications team, bosses, etc., notice that it's attracting more people, but even for themselves, they notice that it's easier then to understand the information. And they do get, when they start this journey, they do get excited because then they notice that accessibility is also for them, even if they don't consider themselves as having accessibility needs. So I think that that's maybe more my practical advice, to just start doing the no budget things and continue advocating and see how it's beneficial.
Yep, totally endorse that. Yeah, most of the things that we've spoken about today don't cost anything, and indeed, even the sort of the accessibility issues that we've not discussed today, that are more about how you would build a whole website and things like this. One way of looking at it is that accessibility doesn't cost extra. It's the cost. It is the basic cost of building the thing. You shouldn't think of it as an extra. It should be that's the cost of producing it. That is the minimum viable product, to use a bit of jargon. So yeah, that is the time it takes to produce a thing that is good quality. And also, if you've got a designer or a web developer or whoever they are, then they can choose, if they've got the skills, if they know how to make things accessible, that is the big prerequisite. But if they know how to make something accessible, then when they get to choose some colors, like we just saw the color contrast, they can choose whether they find ones that are good, well contrasting or not. Now that choice, again, costs nothing, and it happens at a point in time. So again, it doesn't cost anything or very little if you do it from the start. If you have to go back and go and spot all the problems and fix them, that's when it starts taking more time and money to do. And the later that happens in the process, the worse it gets. So it can cost sort of 10, 30 times more to fix something at the end of a production process than it does at the point at the start, when it can cost absolutely nothing because it's simply a choice. Final thing I would add is basically demonstrate it, either yourself or find someone, ideally as close as possible, maybe a member of your staff who has a disability, or there are some really good videos online, particularly from the W3C, where you can basically demonstrate the problem that someone is having and the stress and the problem that it causes them in their life. So show the people the actual impact on real people. Forget about the guidelines, forget about the standards and legal, show the human impact of something. And again, the closer that is to their customer or their beneficiary or a member of their staff or whatever it is, the better.
I agree with everything that my colleagues have said. As I mentioned, the in-person accessibility, to start with, accessibility shouldn't be a point for discussion. It's a moral imperative that everyone is included. But of course, I understand that nowadays finances are the issue sometimes as well. But as my colleagues mentioned, accessibility isn't expensive very often. And even for in-person events, if you are selecting a venue, you will already choose a venue that is accessible. So there will be already ramps and lifts. And the other things that we mentioned, it really doesn't cost anything. There are free accessibility apps, there are free captioning tools that you can use. You can provide information for people to download those applications and use during your event. As we were talking about seating, quiet spaces, these things don't cost anything. If you are organizing catering, it's very easy to add chairs to it. So really, I think that accessibility doesn't cost that much. We always think that is something extra and very costly, but it's not when you think about it and when you can find the right resources and ways to do it.
Thank you all for your answers to this tough question. I hope it answered your question, Lauriane. I'm not seeing another. I see Miriam has her hands up, so if you wouldn't mind telling in the chat if you have a question. Otherwise, I'm seeing a lot of messages from the chat thanking the three of you for your insights. So hopefully there'll be a lot of accessible changes for a lot of people. Yes, Lauriane says it did answer her question.
Well, it was indeed very comprehensive. And once again, we thank you for taking the time to share these best practices. As all of you said, accessibility is a journey, and we can do as many improvements as there are different forms of disability. So I think it is very valuable to those organizing events and publishing and spreading the word about rare diseases and how making sure that the information reaches the audience and is accessible to them. Before we close, maybe each of you would like to share just one key takeaway that you would like the audience to go with. James, would you like to go first?
I think, yeah, I think probably that thing is you have a choice. Yeah, so yeah, every time you produce something, as I mentioned, every email you write, every document you produce, every PowerPoint you deliver, right at the start, and then particularly, and all the way through, and then right at the end, think about accessibility, think about who is my audience, who's going to be receiving this, is this as accessible as possible, because I don't know who is going to receive this. PowerPoint slide decks are passed around to other people, so even if the person you're sending it to, even if you know that they don't have a disability, what about the person that they might share it with immediately, 2 years from now? Make it accessible right from the beginning, and as the others have said, it actually makes things more usable for everybody. So you're not just making it for people with disabilities, which is vitally important, you are actually making it better for everyone. More accessible means more usable, so it just makes sense. It gets your communication method across better.
Thank you, James. Very, very wise. Sorry to put you into the spotlight like this, but now I'll give the floor to Adéla.
I would say start with the small steps, but that are impactful. So start with what you think is the most important for your in-person accessibility event. And again, you know, as James mentioned, think about what your audience will be, people with different abilities, and I think you are set to a great success after.
Thank you, Adéla. And last but not least, Andre.
I was gonna say exactly the same as Adéla. So I will say something else and do a bit of self-promotion, which is, and indeed, don't be afraid to start. Don't be scared to start, and don't be scared that someone will complain that you're not making all the efforts. And especially don't have the mindset that I hear a lot, that is, we cannot make it extremely accessible, so we'll not even try. So that's what Adéla said. Just what I want to share is that there are a lot of resources online. I mean, it's really helpful to also, if you have money, to get trained by an expert, because it's a bit more organized. But there's a lot of resources online. So check our accessibility checklists, check what James and Adéla shared. There's a lot of information online to make sure that you are accessible. So don't be afraid that you don't know, because there is tons of free information to let you know. And don't be afraid to try. And sometimes don't be afraid to fail and to do if you do something not accessible, just correct it and don't lose your momentum. That was many takeaways, sorry.
Thank you, Andre. And thanks to all of you for sharing once again this very, very important insights. So as we close, I just want to remind that this recording will be available online shortly, and everybody registered will receive an email with the link. Our updated resources will be online as of next week, and we will, of course, also do a big 10 days before the Rare Disease Day announcement with official video. So stay tuned. And we wish you a lovely afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on what region of the world you are in. Thanks again to our esteemed speakers, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.